Ambassador Stuart Holliday is president and CEO of Meridian International Center, a leading nonpartisan institution that seeks to advance global security and prosperity through effective leadership and diplomacy. He served as United States Ambassador for Special Political Affairs at the United Nations and coordinator of the U.S. International Information Programs. Previously, he was Special Assistant to the President at the White House, coordinating all executive branch appointments in foreign policy, defense, national security, intelligence, and homeland security. I am thrilled that Stuart is here at this table today. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Matthew, and congratulations on a terrific conference.
Thank you. So I want to just ask a broad question about, you have a long and storied career working throughout various elements of U.S. foreign policy and administrations in the U.S. But to this day, you take a poll, any poll of people in the United States, and my guess would be foreign policy isn't in the top 10.
Yeah.
How much does that inhibit the ability of advancing important foreign policy, and how do we change that if it needs to be changed in this country?
Well, the United States has a long history of swinging back and forth between global engagement and isolationism. This is not a new phenomenon. If you look at, from the League of Nations going down as a result of not wanting to be involved in international entanglements, to the debate over the creation of the UN, the United States has had a fickle relationship. However, I think with the globalization of the economic landscape, and obviously with the threat to our homeland from new transnational challenges and global terrorism, which we're not that many days away from the anniversary of 9/11. It is a question of how foreign policy is cast. If foreign policy is thought of as only the role of diplomats and only something that doesn't affect your daily life. I think a congressman from Tennessee said for his constituents, foreign policy begins at the end of their driveway, that anything beyond that they don't care about. However, if you break those polls down in terms of jobs, security, do they have loved ones in the military that have been deployed to in theater to Iraq and Afghanistan, then they start to engage and understand how international affairs connects to their lives. But you're right. In fact, I've been watching with great interest the degree to which foreign policy has been brought up in these presidential debates, but how quickly things change. My president, George W. Bush, who I worked for when he was governor of Texas, was criticized for not having any foreign policy experience. And we saw how quickly that changed as he was forced to engage and build an alliance and engage the world after 9/11.
So, and I think that's an important point, this pendulum swing that exists. And it's not just necessarily something based on a broader ideology, but it's people, right? I think I was reading a bit about President Biden and his belief when he was chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee. Foreign policy is people, it is relationships. But our own political pendulum is swinging quite dramatically, just in the last decade alone. Yeah. So what is that like for other countries? So if we're putting ourselves in the shoes of other countries working with the United States, what is that experience like?
It's a double-edged sword. Because on the one hand, they're whipsawed by these massive changes. A lot of countries don't change leaders. They don't have elections every 4 years. And you go from, Clinton, to Bush, to Obama, to Donald Trump, now back to Joe Biden, who is a familiar face to most governments and leaders around the world. There's a trust deficit as a result of that. So it makes negotiating agreements more challenging because there's a concern that maybe we'll walk away from them, as we did with the Paris, Climate Accord and, various other, the Iran non-proliferation talks. But I think the other side of the coin is there's an appreciation for the self-correction and the degree to which America can fix its challenges and move from, I mean, we're sort of, I think, held in awe with the degree of flexibility of our, leadership, and how quickly things can change. And we're in a situation in this election right now where I think, we have candidates that are in the lead who have been around a long time. And there's an appetite, I think, that you're hearing, particularly from Governor Haley and others, for that kind of generational shift. But that's why, at Meridian, the private sector's role is so important. Because as traditional diplomacy is constrained by sometimes these shifts in policy positions, the private sector has become a ballast, and corporate diplomacy has become very important as a way to have continuity in relationships, because some of the private sector partners of ours have been in their countries for 50 to 100 years. And they're known, and CEOs are increasingly playing kind of a companion role to ambassadors and undersecretaries of state, and becoming more involved in diplomacy.
Shifting gears just a little bit, because I know in your role at Meridian, not only are you focused on foreign policy and working with foreign policy leaders and being a very important convening body for ambassadors in Washington, but your role now is also very much focused on how to get business leaders more involved in foreign policy. Talk a little bit about what are you looking for when you think of a CEO? You can imagine all the effects that foreign policy might have on their decisions, but what are you wanting these executives to do?
Well, I think there's a macro challenge, and then there's a micro challenge. The macro challenge is that more and more countries in the world are undecided about the path they want to take vis-a-vis the United States and the other view of how countries should operate, more autocratic governments. There's a reason for that. Some of our competitors are present in those markets. They're able to move quicker. So our theory at Meridian is we need to help our private sector and our government come together to be able to de-risk and look for, particularly in the global south, look for ways to accelerate American engagement in those countries. Because if we don't, those are going to be votes at the UN. It's going to be leverage that we're going to lose in the world. And our government and our private sector operate actually independently of each other. And in other countries that we compete with, that's not the case. So part of this is a call to action for American businesses to step up and take some of those risks in the world, but it's also a call to action for the U.S. government to break out of the various silos of mechanisms that we have to support those businesses and look strategically at how we do that across the board. On a micro level, these business leaders are the face of America in many of the countries in which they operate. One of the great things about public diplomacy is the reputation of the United States for investing in local schools, for sustainability, for doing things above and beyond the bottom line. Obviously, there's been some criticism of raw capitalism, but at the end of the day, American businesses are good representatives of our country and promoters of the rule of law, promoters of transparency. And the more American businesses can have the tools and skills to engage, even at the junior level. And so part of our role is to help companies see that even if you're in finance, even if you're not on a line government relations or communications job, you should understand how the world works. You should understand other cultures. You should understand the context in which countries are operating, because you're only going to be more successful if you do.
How are you feeling about many of the challenges the U.S. is currently facing around the world? We saw this morning, this recent deal made with Iran and these hostages returned. You have Russia's invasion of Ukraine, of course, a great deal on the South China Sea, among many, many other issues.
Well, yeah, there are challenges, but if you look at the debate in Washington, there's a faction that says China is the biggest challenge and threat, and we have to be thinking about China at the expense of Ukraine. And then you have others that say this invasion, brutal invasion of Ukraine, is really a referendum on our modern system of the global order, and it's essential that it not prevail. I like to think we can walk and chew gum at the same time. I think, to me, the more immediate threat is Ukraine and pushing back the Russians out of Ukraine because it represents such a direct challenge to the integrity of borders and the sovereignty of nations, in addition to the fact that it has a brutal, immediate human cost and toll. So I hope the American people don't view this simply as a fiscal matter, but view it as the opportunity for the United States to play really a leadership role that I think after the withdrawal from Afghanistan, some people thought we had lost. And obviously we have this domestic partisan political debate, which used to not extend into foreign policy, right? Those debates were, there was the old saying that those differences end at the water's edge. Well, now these foreign policy issues have also become political. And that same goes for China. And if you hear from the business community, they recognize China has to change for them to continue. Secretary Raimondo just had her trip, a successful trip, at least in terms of reestablishing some dialogue, which is important. Shouldn't be overlooked. Communications channels are critical. But you also have, others that in the Congress, particularly, who are racing to be as, vocal and somewhat belligerent on China as they can be. And the truth is, these matters of great nation power competition, yes, there's a security element to it, but the diplomatic element is absolutely essential. And the cost of a kinetic war with China would be significant. And we have to exhaust every diplomatic avenue we can. The private sector is playing a critical role in that, and keep at it.
Stuart, it's great to see you.
Thank you, Matthew.
Ambassador Holliday, thank you very, very much for
Thank you for
joining.
the opportunity.